Yo, what's going on? Mike from Mike Talk Sports. The Suns were just defeated by the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs. Of course, Chris Paul did not play in this last game in which they were blown out, but let me tell you guys what's next for Chris Paul. The Suns are expected to significantly shop center DeAndre Ayton and to also shop their point guard Chris Paul, a guy who they did bring to this organization to bring a bit of a championship pedigree. Now, this is a bit of a meme considering Chris Paul notoriously does not have a ring thus far in his NBA career. But realistically, this move was a positive one, and this worked as the Suns went from kind of a laughingstock, a team who every single season, the only time we'd ever hear news about the Phoenix Suns, it was, oh, when is Devin Booker going to get traded? Now, Chris Paul I wouldn't say he in and of itself brought him out of the irrelevancy. I think that was mainly Devin Booker really just leveling up in this roster around them, getting really good as well. But Chris Paul definitely gave some good years to this Phoenix Suns organization. One of the realities of the situation for the Phoenix Suns is that they probably are not going to win a championship with Chris Paul at the point guard. Now, Chris Paul has obviously clearly declined. He's 38 years old, and his efficiency metrics just simply are not what they used to be. This season, in the regular season, in 59 games, he had 14 points per game and 9 assists per game, which is still a phenomenal mark for him. I think first and foremost, when you talk about the deficiencies of Chris Paul at this point of his career, I think first and foremost, you need to talk about that perimeter defense and just his defense in general. I get it. He was always known as a good defensive point guard. He still has a really low center of gravity, and he doesn't necessarily get bullied out there on the perimeter and in the paint when a bigger guard brings him into the paint. The issue really is that length. It's the lack of athleticism he does possess at this stage in his career. And realistically, if you have an average to above average player on the perimeter getting guarded by Chris Paul, realistically, that's barbecue chicken. He's going to cook Chris Paul all day. When you have a roster constructed of Devin Booker and Kevin Durant as your best two players, you really want a really good perimeter defender playing at that point guard position, and that's not something Chris Paul straight up can offer for the Phoenix Suns anymore. The efficiency wasn't good in the postseason for Chris Paul, and it's definitely taken a step back in the regular season as well, but his three-point percentage is still very respectable. He shot 37.5% from the three-point arc in this regular season, and 44% from the field is definitely down on his two-point percentage in total for his entire career, and it really is that inability to get to those mid-range jump shots that he fell in love with for his entire career. In the playoffs, he played 7 games, and he played 36 minutes per game. So Chris Paul, do you want him playing 36 minutes per game on your playoff team? Probably not, but he still, next year, in my opinion, can give you a solid 28 points per game and be pretty efficient doing so. This year, again, 12 points per game, 7.5 assists per game in the playoffs, 1 turnover a game in the playoffs, so still a really nice assist to turnover ratio, 42% from the field and 32% from 3. Weirdly enough, he shot 50% from the free throw line in this playoff run, albeit on a very, very, very low sample size. Nonetheless, though, genuinely, you do not want Chris Paul to be a top 4 or 5 scoring option on your team, primarily if he got 11, 12 points per game on your team next year and still was that point guard role of kind of bringing the ball up 28 minutes per game, trying to facilitate the ball to other superstar players. I think that is still the ideal scenario with Chris Paul, albeit matching him up with a superstar who's actually a really good defender. So I'm alluding to a team I really like for his match. But first off, talking about the Phoenix Suns, the reality of the situation, they have zero roster mobility whatsoever. And if what is next for Chris Paul, simply put, just to rerun it with the Phoenix Suns, I think that would make complete sense. Not from a schematic perspective, but just from a situational perspective. This team is so hell-bent on the cap. They really have no cap flexibility. The issue with Chris Paul, he's making $30 million a year, not only this year and next year, but until the summer of 2025. Realistically, the Phoenix Suns are not going to be able to get good draft capital or a good player for Chris Paul unless they throw on some significant draft capital to take on that big cap. And obviously, the elephant in the room with the Phoenix Suns, they straight up have no draft compensation flexibility whatsoever. They basically don't have a freed up pick until 2030. All of their picks they're even eligible to end up trading are picks that they need to trade on draft night, or else they will just have to stay put and make that later round selection. To make the case that Chris Paul should be on a different team next year, straight up, the lack of depth really killed the Suns. They don't need one Chris Paul. They need 2 or 3 players that can equal the production of a solid NBA player and not have that one guy who's just so unreliable with his injuries. That's another huge part of this video. It's just he's chronically injured. Can you trust Chris Paul to give you a good 36 minutes per game in the playoffs, all while staying healthy? Absolutely not. And I think it's outright delusional that this Suns coaching staff gave him such a significant workload, not only in the regular season, but also in the postseason. So if I were the Phoenix Suns, I would definitely look to trade Chris Paul. Not only defensively is he not offering you much at this point in his career, but again, it's those injuries. He's just unreliable at this point. The one team I really like him going to, and there's going to be 3 teams on this list for me. Number 1 is going to be the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis Antetokounmpo really has never been paired with an excellent passer. He's had some teammates such as Jrue Holiday, which, don't get me wrong, are above average passers for the NBA, but Chris Paul is still a phenomenal passer in my opinion. This would do wonders for Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think he would see a bit of a new play style in terms of more pick and roll actions with Giannis Antetokounmpo, which I think is still an untapped part of his game. The number 2 team I can really see Chris Paul going to in this offseason is another veteran team that's really trying to win a championship. It really doesn't make sense for him to be on a younger team at this point of his career, and that is going to be the Miami Heat. Of course, they have Kyle Lowry, but they realistically have Gabe Vincent going into next year and right now running that starting point guard role, and I really like Gabe Vincent. He offers a lot defensively, and he's that nice 3-and-D wing player / point guard role. The thing is, Gabe Vincent, in my opinion, is well below league average in terms of a point guard passing ability. So to have the Miami Heat in there with a really good passing point guard, I think would do absolute wonders for this offense that, let's be honest, consistently struggles every single year in the regular season. And I believe this is one of the reasons they've yet to be able to go over the hump and win a championship, is because of this stagnant half-court offense at some times. The last team I think it would be fun for Chris Paul to go to is his old former team, the LA Clippers. Of course, they do have Russell Westbrook at point guard right now. I'd be somewhat surprised to see the Clippers bring back Russell Westbrook, even though he did do pretty solid for him. He just does not match that play style whatsoever. They need some solid off-ball players who are also good at shooting the 3 and good at passing, and that's not something Russell Westbrook necessarily offers at this point in his career, and that's something that Chris Paul does offer. Again, you have 2 really good defensive star players in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Same with Jimmy Butler, and of course same with Giannis Antetokounmpo. But again, you have a young point guard in Bones Hyland who has shown a lot of ups and a lot of downs in his NBA career. And if you want to better develop Bones Hyland, I think it would be a phenomenal job to have him run that 6-man or just backup point guard role next year and have him learn from a veteran like Chris Paul. Thanks for listening, guys. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think is next for Chris Paul in his career? And will he ever win that coveted NBA championship?